Time for us to begin our Bible class. We are in the book of Revelation, where we left off a couple weeks ago. And so we are at the very end of Revelation chapter 8. We've been looking through these things in Revelation. We noticed that John is told back in chapter 4 that he is to come up here to see the things that are going to take place afterwards. And so John has this vision of heaven that he's brought up to the throne room of heaven, and he sees God there on his throne. He sees these creatures, these four creatures that are around the throne. He sees the elders that are there around the throne. In chapter 5, he sees the lamb that had been slain is there at the throne as well. And then there are seals that are broken. There are seals that are open. There's 7 of those that are opened up, and the seals are basically kind of like a king's proclamation. When you think about an announcement that's being made, and that's exactly what's happening with the breaking of the 7 seals, it's announcements of things that are going to take place. And that first announcement had to do with the gospel going out into the world, and because the gospel is going out into the world, because the Christians are taking the word of God out, there's persecution that is going to follow. And so when the other seals are opened up and you got those other horsemen that go out, that's persecution that the Christians are going to face. And so there's an announcement, if you will, of these things that are going to take place. As we get into where we've been in chapter 8, there's the blowing of the trumpets. And now the trumpets are a warning. And so you've got an announcement that's made. Here's what's going to happen. Here's the punishment that's going to come because of the persecution of God's people by the Roman Empire in the first century. And so now the trumpets are sounding, and they are warnings. They're warnings for Rome. And we were looking at those first 4 trumpets a couple weeks ago. And so we are in Revelation 8. Um, and so the trumpet sounded in verse 7. It says, the first angel sounded, and hail and fire followed, mingled with blood. And they were thrown to the earth, and a third of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. And so as we look at these warnings that are given, there's calamity, there's natural calamity that's going to take place. And so we see in verse 7 there that there's a land disaster, if you will. There's something that's going to happen, some sort of calamity that's going to happen upon the Roman Empire that's going to affect vegetation. It's going to affect their crops. And so we see that that's something that's going to take place. We talked a couple weeks ago about the third century crisis that the Roman Empire faced. That there was a plague somewhere around 250 A.D. There were military defeats that took place. There was a lack of productivity, if you will, of their crops, and so there was a food shortage. But all these things that happened in the third century, you had civil wars that were taking place. You had people that were overthrowing emperors, generals that were killing emperors and becoming emperor themselves. And so you just had a lot of chaos going on in the Roman Empire that would seem to kind of maybe fit with what's going on here. That these are warnings that are given. This isn't the end of the Roman Empire. They're gonna survive. They're gonna limp along, if you will. They're until 476 AD. But there's going to be other invasions that are going to come. Their downfall is going to start earlier than 476 because they don't fall on one day, right? Rome wasn't built in a day. Rome wasn't defeated in a day either. It's going to be a long process of them going into decline and fall. But there's some sort of land disaster that's going to come, and we see that with the first trumpet. The second trumpet in verse 8, the second angel sounded, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea, and a third of the sea became blood, and a third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. I think Morgan brought this up that this could be like a meteor, right? It could be something that looks like a star, but it crashes into the sea. It would look like a mountain on fire as it came down. But there's some sort of sea disaster, and it affects the fish, and so that was part of their livelihood as well, as far as their food supply goes, is that they're going to lose a third. Now, again, a third is a warning, right? It's not, it's bad, right? A third of the ships being lost, it's going to affect their trade, so it's going to affect their commerce, and so these things are going to affect the Roman Empire. And the third angel sounded, it says in verse 10, and a great star fell from heaven, burning like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. It talks about the name of that star being wormwood. That basically wormwood was something that was very bitter, and it says that the waters are going to become poisonous because of this. And so you've got something that's affecting their fresh water. And so when you look at the ancient world, when you look at those older things, they would basically divide the world into four parts. You'd have the land, you'd have the sea, you'd have the fresh water, and then you'd have the heavens, right? And so they would divide the world, if you will, and they're thinking up into four parts. Well, here you've got a disaster on the land, you've got a disaster on the sea, you've got a disaster on the fresh water. And where we left off was the fourth angel sounding there in verse 12. The fourth angel sounded, and a third of the sun was struck, a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, and a third of them were darkened. A third of the day did not shine, and likewise the night. And I looked, and I heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, because of the remaining blasts of the trumpet of the three angels who are about to sound. So there's a fourth woe, and it again, we can't take this literally, right? Because is it literally going to, be a star that falls from heaven and hits the earth? Well, no, it can't literally be a star. It can be a shooting star, it can be a meteorite. But if a star were to fall to earth, the star is bigger than the earth, it would wipe the entire earth out, right? So, not to be taken literally. And the same thing here with this. It's a picture that John is seeing, and what we want to do is we want to see the picture. Sometimes we get real close to the picture and we start trying to pick out, well, what's that brush stroke? And what's this brush stroke? And what does that represent? And we just kind of need to maybe step back and see the whole picture of what it is that's going on here. Um, a third of the sun and the moon and the stars are smitten. What does that mean? Well, it means it's going to be a dark day for them, right? There's going to be something that's going to happen. It's going to be bad times for the Roman Empire. They were very superstitious people. Most pagan idolaters were very superstitious people. And so if they would see something like a shooting star, or they would see something like a comet, or they would see a flock of ravens, right? They would take all those things to be omens. Oh no, something bad's about to happen because they saw this. And so it's likely something that is a forewarning, if you will, of these things. But this language that's being used here is judgment kind of language. Is judgment kind of language that God uses elsewhere in the Bible. Come over with me to Isaiah for a moment in chapter 13. We're going to see this same type of terminology used in talking about God's punishment of Babylon. Babylonians were going to take the children of Israel into captivity, but they were going to go beyond what they were to do, if you will, and there's going to be punishment that's going to be meted out for Babylon. In Isaiah chapter 13, notice with me verse 10. It says, For the stars of heaven and their constellations will not give their light. The sun will be darkened in its going forth, and the moon will not cause its light to shine. So you have the same kind of language that's being used here, not talking about the end of the world, talking about punishment that God's going to mete out upon Babylon, talking about a judgment, if you will, in time against Babylon. So very similar language used there is that what we see over in Revelation, talking about a judgment in time against the Roman Empire because of their persecution of the saints. Not talking about something that's going to happen at the end of the world when everything's burned up, because that's going to be, right, that's going to happen. You're not going to have time to go run and hide when that happens, right? It's not going to be a third, right? Everything's going to be burned up with fervent heat. So not talking about the end of the world there in Revelation. Come over with me to Joel chapter 2. Joel chapter 2, also talking about punishment and judgment that God is making in time. Notice there in verse 10, it says, The earth quakes before them, the heavens tremble, the sun and moon grow dark, and the stars diminish their brightness. Right? Again, he's describing what's going to be a dark day for those that are enemies of God. Um, also in verse 31 of Joel chapter 2, says, The sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the coming of the great and awesome day of the Lord. And so there's a day of the Lord that's coming for us, right? There's a day of the Lord that's coming at the end of the time, at end of time when Jesus returns. But there are days of the Lord that are spoken of in the Old Testament that are judgments in time, where he's saying, all right, there's a nation, the nation has committed so much sin that they've filled up their wine vat God uses this wine vat terminology. He says, every nation has this wine vat, and their sins go into the wine vat like you would put the grapes in the wine vat. And when the wine vat is full, when that nation has sinned so much that God says, okay, that's it. You've reached your limit, then he's going to get in there and he's going to tread out the grapes. He's going to get in there and he's going to tread out that nation in the wine vat. He's going to make a judgment against them. And so God made a judgment against Babylon. And where's Babylon today? Are they a great empire? Were they ever a great empire after that time? No, he's treaded them out, right? And so their punishment has been meted. And so the same thing here with regards to the Roman Empire, because of what they're doing, because they're fighting against God's people, because they are tormenting God's people. Well, there's punishment that's going to come for them, and it's going to be a dark day for them. And so these things, these calamities, these natural calamities, ought to get their attention, right? When they see these calamities taking place, it ought to cause them to want to get closer to God. It ought to cause them to want to seek out the God who's doing this, because their gods aren't protecting them. Their false gods are not protecting them, and so it should get their attention. It should show them that God is in control, and maybe God allows different weather disasters to take place today in order to get our attention, in order to get our focus on God. Comments or questions on these things? Yes, Gail. Well, yeah, there are people that think the wormwood thing is going to take place at the end of time. They think that what we're looking at in Revelation chapter 4 through chapter 19 is this 7-year tribulation that's going to take place after the rapture. But the Bible doesn't teach that. And the Bible actually tells us at the beginning of Revelation in chapter 1 that these are things that are shortly to come to pass, and that the time is at hand. And at the end of the book, John is told, don't seal up this book. Don't seal this up, because the time is at hand. The time is near, right? So don't seal it up, because it's not something that's a long way off in the future. And so they misread what they've got. And yeah, there's a lot of folks that want to go in a lot of different places with Revelation, especially in chapter 9, which we should get into today. Yeah, Mark. Well, I think what it speaks to us today is the principle that if we stick with God, no matter what evils there are in the world, because there's been evil in the world since the very beginning, going back to the Garden of Eden, and the idea is that if we stick with God, even though we may face persecution for that, even though we may have to go through some horrible things, that if we stick with God, we're going to be the ones that are victorious. So I think that message is there for all of mankind. But as far as what he's specifically dealing with, if he's talking about things that are going to happen in the 1930s and 1940s, it wouldn't be any comfort to those first century Christians that are undergoing the persecution. Well, it's comfort. Mhm. Right. Well, yeah, certainly, like I said, the principles that are there, right, speak to us that when we're going through a bad time. But I don't think what he's writing here is specifically about what's going to take place in the 1930s and 40s. What he's talking about here are events that are going to befall the Roman Empire. But again, the principles that are there for us is okay, they're being persecuted by the Roman Empire and they're facing some dark days and they're facing some tribulation that they're in, right? Well, there's going to be tribulation that we're going to be in. The tribulation hasn't stopped, right? It hasn't ended. Just because the Roman Empire fell doesn't mean that, the tribulation of this world and the pains of this world and the evils that are in this world, those things haven't stopped. And so it's a good book for us because of those principles that if we are faithful, right, remain faithful unto death, as he says in Revelation 2:10, and you'll receive the crown of life. And so the message to the Christians is, yeah, things are tough. Don't give up. Don't give in. Don't lose your spiritual life to preserve your physical life. And that message would be the same for us today, right? When we're faced with trials and troubles and struggles, and don't give up, don't give in, don't try to preserve your physical life and then end up losing your spiritual life because that's trading, this for that. And you don't want to make that trade, right? Because it's a bad trade. Good comments, Mark. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Anything we've looked at so far? So we got the four trumps. So we got these four natural calamities that are going to take place. And so God can use natural disasters. Doesn't mean that he causes them to happen. He set the process of weather in motion. And sometimes he just lets that roll, right? But he may use that against different nations. And certainly here we see that he's going to use that against the Roman Empire, these natural calamities. And then we have this interval. It says, I heard an angel, or some translations say that it's an eagle flying in the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth because of the remaining blasts of the trumpet of the three angels who are about to sound. So there's seven of these. Four of them have sounded. There's four natural calamities. Now there's three woes that are going to come. And it's kind of like the message is if you think that what's happened so far is bad, just wait. The worst is yet to come, right? The more woes that are to be had here upon the Roman Empire. And so you have this interval where you've got this eagle or this angel that is flying in the midst of heaven. Now, if it's an eagle, we understand eagles fly in the heaven, right? They fly in the sky, first heaven. But if this is an angel that's flying here, then maybe in the heavens there where God is located. And so directly overhead, woe to those on the earth, right, for these last three trumpets. And so things are going to be even worse. I come down to chapter 9 and verse 12. It says, one woe is past. Behold, two more woes are coming after these things. And so there's going to be a total of three of these that are going to take place. And so we're going to read about these woes going from chapters 9 through chapter 11. An eagle is known as being a bird of prey, right? And so it's up there and it's looking for something that it's going to pick off maybe. And but whether it's an eagle or whether it's an angel, it doesn't really matter. All that matters is that we've got this messenger that's giving this message, that's saying that there's these things that are going to come to take place. Now, people look at this and they say, well, here's an eagle flying in the midst of heaven saying three woes. And they'll talk about, okay, here's an eagle. And later it's going to talk about a bear, right? And you've got a dragon that's in there. And they'll say, well, the eagle is the United States and the bear is Russia and the dragon is China. And it's talking about some future war that's going to take place. But it's not what it's about. That's not what it's about. It's just a messenger that's delivering a message. It doesn't represent any particular nation there. Comments or questions through anything through chapter 8? If you're visiting with us, there's a lot of ground that we've covered getting to this point. These lessons are on our YouTube channel if you'd want to go back and start, but we've been on this for a while. So here in chapter 9 is one of the maybe strangest chapters of the whole book of Revelation. One of the maybe hardest chapters of the whole book of Revelation. It says, Then the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fallen from heaven to the earth. To him was given the key to the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and smoke arose out of the pit like smoke of a great furnace. So the sun and the air were darkened because of the smoke of the pit. Then out of the smoke locusts came upon the earth, and to them was given power as the scorpions of the earth have power. They were commanded not to harm the grass of the earth, nor any green thing, nor any tree, but only those men who did not have the seal of God on their foreheads. And they were not given authority to kill them, but to torment them for 5 months. Their torment was like the torment of a scorpion when it strikes a man. In those days, men will seek death and will not find it. They will desire to die, and death will flee from them. This is a weird scene, isn't it? It's almost like you're having this dream, right? And everything in the dream is strange. And then, even though everything in the dream is strange, you say, "Now here's the really weird part." And people are like, "What do you mean?" Right? And so that's kind of what I think of when I read this here about what's going on. Don't Right? We had a star that fell from heaven and it struck the oceans, right? And so we saw that with regards to the second trumpet. There was a star that was wormwood that fell to the earth, right? And it affected the drinking water. Don't try to look and say, okay, here's a star and here's a star and here's a star, and don't try to line those up and try to find out, okay, the star's got to be talking about the same, because it isn't, right? John has this vision. He sees this picture. And in this picture, there's something like a star that comes down and strikes the water. There's something like a star that comes down and strikes the water. There's something like a star that comes down, but it says to him was given. So, right, it's not, don't try to line the stars up to say, well, this is all talking about the same thing, because here's a picture, and then here's a picture, and then here's a picture. And the star in that picture may not represent the same thing. You've got to just look at it as an individual picture, an individual vision that John is seeing. And so sometimes people will try to line these stars up and say, well, who is this, or what is this about that's going on here? Did you have something, Hayden? I thought maybe you were raising your hand, but that's all right. I see movement, right? I sense movement. So don't try to line the stars up. So the fifth angel sounded, I saw a star fallen from heaven to earth. To him was given the key to the bottomless pit. And so we have this star falling from heaven. And so he's personified. Whoever this is personified, right? That it's a personage, because the key to the bottomless pit is given to him. And so this could possibly be a rebellious angel, right, that has fallen from heaven to earth. To him is given this. It could be in reference to Satan, right, who is a fallen angel. We'll talk about that more in a moment. But whatever the case is, God is going to use them to do his bidding. Now, it doesn't mean that God's directing them. It doesn't mean that God is forcing them to do things that are evil. But God is going to use this to his benefit. He's going to so he's subject to God in this, and power is given to him because he's given the key to, so he's given some authority here over this bottomless pit. Now, again, don't try to read this literally, because what is a pit by definition? It's a hole, right? It's a hole in the ground, but it has otherwise it's just a shaft, right? If it doesn't have a bottom to it, it's just a shaft. But a pit has a bottom to it. Well, so could you literally have something that's a bottomless pit? This terminology is used to describe something that's like the abyss, and we'll talk about that more in just a little bit. And so he's given a key, right? The key is used to open that up. He can open the seal, he can open up this locked bottomless pit. And then when he opened it, it said smoke arose out of the pit like the smoke of a great furnace. We would say, where there's smoke, there's fire, right? Now, this isn't, I don't think, talking about the uh, lake that burns with fire and brimstone, right? But this is kind of representative, if you will, of that. It's representative of the idea that you got fire and smoke, and it's in the earth, right? It's under the earth. It's coming up from the earth, and so the idea is that this is not a good place, if you will. This is maybe the abyss was thought to be the holding area that God had for those angels that had sinned, right? That He's going to keep them there. He's going to hold them in that particular abyss. And so he opens this up, and there's this great furnace. The sun and the air are darkened by thick smoke, but there's something in the smoke, right? And what's coming out of the smoke, what's coming out of this pit, are these tormenting locusts. And it says that they're given some sort of power like scorpions. Now, locusts don't sting. Typically, a locust, it isn't going to be any any isn't going to do you any harm, right? As far as an individual locust, it's not going to bite you, it's not going to sting you, it isn't going to do anything to us as human. It normally doesn't have the power to inflict pain, but these locusts, it says they can sting like a scorpion, and so they've got the power to inflict pain. Don't normally die from pain, right? And so it says that it's going to be tormenting them. It's going to cause them pain, but it isn't going to kill them. Notice it says they are not to hurt the grass, right? They're not to hurt. And so locusts typically, when you look in the Old Testament, in Joel chapter 1 and 2, you see locusts that are used that they would understand the locusts come in and they make a mess of things, right? They eat up the vegetation, they eat up the crops. Locusts, real locusts, will attack the grass. They don't harm people, but they'll attack the grass. They'll eat the bark off of trees. They will eat rope. They will eat cloth. They will eat up just about everything that they can. And so they're very destructive. We saw locusts as one of the plagues upon Egypt way back in Exodus chapter 10, that there was a plague upon them, and locusts came and it ate up whatever was left from the hailstorm, right? They just kind of munched everything up along the way that was there. And so this is going to be a torment for them, and it's going to last for 5 months. And so these whatever this is, whatever these locusts represent, it's going to torment them for a time period. It says 5 months, but again, don't take that 5 months as being literal, right? It's just normally if you had locusts that would come, typically a locust swarm would last about 5 months. And so perhaps that's getting their attention there. Yes.
About the locusts that came this year was the noise.
Yeah.
When my husband and I walked in the morning, I thought somebody had a burglar alarm go off in the subdivision. That's what all this noise sounded like. And when they fell dead on the street and whatever, why the bears came and cleaned them up.
Yeah, the bears will have a feast with them, right? But yeah, they're loud. They make a lot of noise.
Picture of it.
Mm.
That's what locusts. When I hear it, I just hear that place in my head of the thousands of them this year.
Yeah. Well, we had in Ohio we had this. They called them the 7-year locusts, and somehow they would rise up out of the ground and they would lay their eggs, and I don't know, is it a 7-year gestation period or something, but 7 years later those locusts would come back and they'd be there in that same area, and loud. And if you're driving through a swarm of them, it's like you're driving through a rainstorm. They're just all over the place.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that the locusts, were told not to plant the grass or the tree.
Yeah. Well, their power's limited. Right.
They were told, talk to you.
Yeah. Well, it shows that God's got authority over this, right? That they're still answerable to God for whatever it is. But this punishment that's going on, and notice the punishment is not on it's not on the righteous, right? Now we've seen things that are going to happen to the Christians. We've seen persecution that's going to come upon the Christians, but this is persecution that's going to come upon others, or these are things that are going to befall others. They weren't to hurt the grass, only the men who do not have the mark of the righteous, right? Now we talked about that in chapter 7, that number, that 144,000, that number that John heard, right? And who are these folks? Well, they're the ones that are going to be sealed. God's going to have a way of sealing them and having his mark on their foreheads. Now the mark on our foreheads isn't so God knows that we're his, right? It's kind of like having the Holy Spirit given to us. The Holy Spirit isn't given to us so God can look and say, okay, yeah, you're one of mine. Okay, no, you're not one of mine. God knows who's his and whose isn't, right? It's for our benefit that we can know that we are a child of God, that we can know that we belong to God, right? And so those that are not righteous, those who are not following God, they're the ones who are going to suffer through all of this. And so it's not going to kill them, right? But it's a warning. It's meant to get their attention. It says the men will seek death and not find it. Now, obviously, they could. Pardon me. Allergies, man. Um, they could commit suicide, right? But it's like sometimes when you've got a disease or you've got something that's so bad, you wish that it was over. You wish the pain was over, right? But it's not going to kill them. It's just going to cause pain. Um, and so you've got this description here that's given of what the locusts look like. It says in verse 7, the shape of the locusts was like horses prepared for battle. On their heads and on their faces were I'm sorry, on their heads were crowns of something like gold, and their faces were like the faces of men. They had hair like women's hair, and their teeth were like lions' teeth. They had breastplates like breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was like the sound of chariots with many horses running into battle. They had tails like scorpions, and there were stings in their tails. Their power was to hurt men 5 months. And so, as Esther was saying, right, they make a lot of noise, right? It sounds like horses and chariots in battle, and we might get the idea, well, this is some sort of an invading army here. But hold on to that for a moment. The shape of the locusts were like horses prepared for battle, and it might get us to think about the Parthians. Parthians were horsemen; they had a lot of cavalry, and but the notice that John's trying to give a description of what it is that he sees, and it's maybe difficult for John to describe what it is that he sees. Notice in that section there, beginning in verse 7, how many times he uses the word like and as. Notice how many times those words are there. So is it a horse? No, it's like a horse. Do they have human faces? No, it's like a human face, right? So it's intelligent, it's discernible. Do they have women's hair? No, they have something that's like women's hair. And so it's not something that's beautiful to look upon, but it's kind of like when you've got this. He's describing this thing that it's about as ugly as can be. Is the idea, right? It's got iron teeth. It's got this long, stringy hair. It's got a face that looks like a man, right? And they've got these tails with stingers on them, and so it's a horrible looking thing. It's a terrible thing, right? It's an ugly thing. They've got crowns on their heads, right? This is again the Stephanus crowd. Well, they're gonna be victorious in their affliction, if you will, if you wanna look at it that way. But they've got faces like men. It shows that they're intelligent. They've got teeth like lions. It shows that they've got some power. They have breastplates. It shows maybe that they've got some protection, and they're making a lot of noise. And notice in verse 11 it says, "And they had his king over them, the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon, but in Greek he has the name Apollyon." And so they've got a king over them. They've got somebody that's in charge of them. They've got somebody who's directing them in what it is they're doing. Yes, Stacy.
I'm sorry, go back to a couple of verses.
That's right.
You mentioned 5 months. Is there a significance for that? And I'm sorry, regarding.
Yeah. No, I don't know that there's any specific reference to that. It's a whole number. So it's going to wholly take care of what God wants to have happen here. 5 months was the length of a locust swarm would normally last, and so it may be connected to that he's using this imagery of locusts here. But don't think that these are real locusts, and don't think that these are real creatures, and that these things are coming out of this bottomless pit, and that they're flying around and stinging people. It's representative of what's going to happen. Yes.
Question too, because I know we're not in Joel, but it's interesting how the imagery is so similar to Joel, and I've always like heard the two sides of like either literal or in speaking metaphorically.
Yeah.
And I wonder what your opinion was on.
Well, I think here it's metaphorical for sure. In Joel, I think some of it is real because he's calling to mind, real uh, destruction that locusts can do. But then he's also using it figuratively, I think, in the book of Joel to talk about what's going to happen with Babylon coming in. Yeah. Good question. So they've got a king over them. Now, Abaddon in the Hebrew means destruction, and Apollyon in Greek means destroyer. And so you've got destroyer and destruction. These things are destructive, right? Their leader is taking them or leading them into destruction. And so some folks might think that, well, this person with the key to the bottomless pit, the one who's kind of in charge of all this, the one who has the power of the air, right? That these things are airbound, that they're flying, that we're talking about Satan here maybe being the one that's kind of guiding and controlling them. Certainly Satan is behind all of this, but Satan also has minions that will help him in this as well. Apollyon in the Greek looks very close to Apollo, one of their Greek gods. And what's interesting about Apollo is that Domitian claimed to be an incarnation of Apollo. Domitian wants to be worshiped. He wants to be worshiped as God. He's going to persecute the Christians because they won't burn incense to him. They won't say that Caesar is Lord. They won't treat him that way. And so that's what's going to get the Christians into trouble. So is John trying to make some sort of backhanded way of saying that this is Domitian who's the one who's leading this group, who's leading this torment? Possibly there. They're certainly not in service to God. The cult of Apollo had many different symbols that they used, but the locust was one of the symbols that they used in the cult of Apollo. And so, again, this could be in reference to that. Either way, they're in service to Satan, and God's going to make use of this to torment those that are unrighteous. So, what is it that this vision is about? Is this some sort of outside invading army? It doesn't look to be that way, because an outside invading army doesn't care whether you're righteous or you're unrighteous, doesn't care if you're Christian or non-Christian. They're going to slaughter everyone equally, right? So what is it that's going to affect people who are unrighteous, but isn't going to affect people who are righteous? The judgment of God. But why is God going to judge them? What have they done? They've done evil, right? They've committed sin. And sin creates a mess in your life, right? Even if it's just in this life, people that are sinful, that are addicted to something, that addiction causes their body to break down. It causes them to be in pain, right? It causes them to miss out on things. It affects those that are around them as well, but the sinner feels the affliction of their pains. And it looks like that's what's going on here that he's talking about. These folks, whether it's a sexually transmitted disease, whether it's something that's born from their addiction, whether it's something that's born from their sin, there's something here that is going to affect them, and it's going to affect them in a negative way, and it's not going to affect those who are righteous. And so there are times where it looks like God punishes folks for their sins physically in this life. You've got earlier in Revelation, you had a false teacher. She's referred to as Jezebel, and God says, "I'm going to cast her into a sick bed." Well, what is that? She's going to have some sort of affliction, right? That's going to come along because of her sin. In Romans chapter 1, it talks about those that practice homosexuality, and it says they shall bear the error of their penalty within themselves. And when you think about AIDS and other sexually transmitted diseases, there are things that physically happen to those that practice some sinful behaviors. And so it looks like that's sort of maybe what's going on here. The fallen star here could be Satan. In Luke chapter 10 and verse 18, Jesus said that he saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. But this isn't necessarily talking about the same event. So it'd be hard to prove that it is Satan. But when you think about he who has the power of the air, why is it that Satan has the power of the air? Why is it that Satan is the king of this world, or the prince of this world, if you will? Because men have allowed him to. Because men have made him that. Because men have committed sin and followed after him, knowingly or unknowingly. And so they've given him that power to make him that. Does that make sense? Comments or questions on any of these things? In line with this, let's look at 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 4. We'll back up to verse 3 here, 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 3 and 4. Paul says, "Even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing, whose minds the God of this age has blinded, who do not believe, lest the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine on them." And so you've got folks that are blinded to the gospel. They're blinded to the message of God. They're being unrighteous in what it is that they're doing. And it says that the God of this age has blinded them. Because Satan doesn't say, well, there is no God most of the time. Satan doesn't say, well, Jesus isn't his son. most of the time. Satan says, no, there is a God, and Jesus is his son, but you just do whatever it is that you want to do to honor him. You do whatever it is that you want to do to say that you belong. And so Satan muddles up the waters, right? He muddies the waters to give people a false sense of security, but they're really following after him if they're not following after Jesus himself. Any last minute comments, questions, or snide remarks before we break for worship? We got a little bit more to look at with regards to what's going on here, but we'll pick up from here next week and add a little bit to what we've talked about and see if we can finish chapter 9 next week. Thanks for your attention and your comments.